can't see or feel the force causing this globe to levitate, but it's not magic, it's magnetic. An essential part of our daily lives, magnets are used for a lot more than just sticking stuff to the fridge. They help run motors and generators, and are also found in computers, televisions, and microphones. Magnets occur in nature, but only 2 centuries ago, scientists figured out how to make them using metal and electricity. Production at the magnet foundry begins with the creation of a mold. A tray containing 4 magnet shapes is loaded into a machine that fills it with sand. A worker removes the pattern and smooths the surface dimpled by the machine's lid. Then it's back inside. This time, the machine pumps in gases that chemically alter the sand, hardening it in a matter of seconds. The sand slab is now a durable mold. And these molds are made in a wide variety of shapes and sizes. Now it's time to mix together the ingredients for the magnets themselves. They include copper, cobalt, sulfur, nickel, pure iron, aluminum, and titanium. All of these metals are loaded into an electrical induction furnace. It generates a pulsating electromagnetic field that heats the metal to almost 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, melting everything into a molten soup. The metal is poured into the molds. Because the gases that harden the sand are highly flammable, the molds burst into flames. Still ablaze, they slide to another part of the foundry where workers knock them to the floor and bust them open with sledgehammers. This lets the air in, cooling the molds and allowing the gases to burn off. All of the pieces are shoveled into a bin, and workers separate the metal from the sand chunks using what else? A magnet. But these metal pieces aren't yet magnetized themselves. That will come later. A set of rings designed for use in electric motors is threaded onto a copper pipe. The ring-covered pipe is placed in a tube. Then, silica sand is packed in to hold the rings in position. Both ends of the tube are sealed with concrete. Then, it's into an electrical furnace. It heats the tube until it's red hot. This superheating primes the rings inside to accept an electromagnetic field, which will be delivered by this metal rod. The rod slides down the center of the copper pipe and is clamped into place. Water keeps the pipe from melting as a low-voltage, high-current charge is delivered to the rings inside. Workers break open the seal. The process has left the rings mildly magnetized. Any rough edges are smoothed away. At this point, the magnets are pretty useless. But this machine empowers them with a strong electromagnetic charge. The establishment of that weak magnetic field earlier ensures that the magnetization is now properly oriented. Now that's some serious magnetic muscle. The wide array of magnets manufactured today are critical to our daily lives because their invisible power helps keep so many things running.
People have been playing with small balls of stone, clay, or marble since ancient Egyptian and Roman times. Today's marbles are actually made of glass and used for industrial tasks as well as games. Glass is not only inexpensive and durable, but also quite beautiful. To make marbles, this company melts recycled glass with marbles made earlier, but rejected for being the wrong size. All this goes into a kiln heated to 2200 degrees Fahrenheit. After 16 hours, they open a door at the bottom of the kiln and the molten glass flows out. A shearing device cuts the stream every half a second, forming segments called slugs that become marbles. To make different sized marbles, they adjust the device to cut at shorter or longer intervals. The slugs slide down chutes landing between grooves on spinning cast iron rolls. The spinning keeps the slugs from sticking. They'll need 72 hours to cool completely, but their final appearance is already set. That was determined back in the kiln, when the airflow drove the heat to melt the glass and mix the colors. These channels separate the good from the bad. Openings along the way weed out the ones that are too big or too small, and collect the ones that are just right. More intricate marbles are handmade. This craftsman first preheats some clear glass in a small oven. Then he breaks off a piece of colored glass. After the clear glass has melted in the furnace overnight, he gathers some on a steel rod, then picks up a chunk of preheated colored glass with it. He forms a knob and works the mass into a long string that's up to 16.5 feet long and thin as a noodle. He'll use them in various colors to decorate the clear glass cores of the marbles. He gathers a clump of melted clear glass on the rod and shapes it with wet newspaper, which won't stick to hot glass. After shaping the end, he rolls the clump on several preheated colored glass strings. Then it's back in the furnace. He repeats these steps up to 3 times and rolls the clump on a metal table to even out the surface between each trip to the furnace. Then he adds a layer of clear glass on top. With another tool now, he stretches the clump to about 1.5 feet long. He'll use this to make several cores. To make the second layer of the core, he rolls a 2-inch long segment onto colored glass slivers called ribbons. After rolling them in the furnace to melt them, he flattens the ribbons with pliers and snips off the excess at the ends. He wraps the core and the ribbons in a layer of clear glass, then hand shapes it. Now he rolls the core on more glass strings. Then it's back in the furnace to meld them. He adds one more clear glass layer and the inside is finished. That's a total of 6 layers for this marble. Other models have fewer or more. The craftsman shapes the glass with several metal and wooden tools. He measures the diameter with metal calipers and gradually sculpts a sphere. He'll make up to 5 marbles from this segment, ranging up to the size of a golf ball. After scoring the glass with a knife, he places it in the open end of a pipe to hold it. Then he gently taps the rod, which breaks the glass and releases the sphere. He melts away the bump left at the spot where the glass broke. Next, the marble goes into an oven at 986 degrees Fahrenheit. The oven slowly cools overnight to strengthen the glass. Clearly a cut above, this eye-catching handcrafted marble is already an object of art. Vinyl records have an ever-increasing following among audiophiles, collectors, and DJs. Some say they sound better than digital CDs and MP3s. To cater to this market, some record companies are releasing more music on vinyl, a manufacturing process that's interesting and fun to watch. The first step is to cut a master record. This flat disc is made of aluminum, and it will be the core of the master. The surface has a gritty texture early on, but they sand it down and polish it smooth. They place the aluminum discs on a conveyor belt, and they ride towards a device that will coat them with a veneer of lacquer. The disc enters the curtain coater. Nitrocellulose lacquer, a similar substance to nail polish, oozes out of a long, thin opening, forming a veil or curtain. As the disc passes through the curtain, it's slattered with the lacquer. Rollers with scrapers catch the runoff. The excess lacquer they collect is reused. The lacquer starts to dry immediately. The solvents evaporate, and the veneer hardens into a nail polish-like finish. But like any manicure job, there are often flaws. At this inspection station, workers scrutinize each lacquer disc for pits, bumps, or dirt. Even a minor imperfection won't be tolerated, so the rejection rate is high, about 50%. They recycle the rejects. They rim the good masters with plastic edging. It will stop the discs from rubbing together during stacking and damaging the finish. Next, a worker holds the disc under a hydraulic puncher that cuts a hole in the center. Then, handling it carefully so he doesn't disturb the finish, he places it on a spindle. A robotic arm slides a plastic ring down the spindle, depositing it around the center hole of the disc. Like the plastic edging, the ring will also space the discs apart. Now the master discs are ready to take a trip to the studio. The lacquer disc is about to be cut. The engineer places it on the recording machine, called a lathe. He peels the protective ribbing away from the rim. He places a vacuum line at the center, which suctions to the underside of the disc and holds it in place. The engineer now moves the cutter and a microscope above the disc. He lowers the cutter onto the outer edge of the disc and it does a test cut. He positions a microscope just above the test groove and then peers into it to get a good look at the cut. He makes adjustments to the cut, and then he's ready to record. The lathe cuts the lead-in groove and the music begins. The sapphire-tipped cutter etches the sound into the surface of the disc. From start to finish, the recording will be one continuous groove in the record. A computer monitors the cutting and adjusts the spacing between the grooves where needed. A little vacuum draws up scrap as the cutter carves the groove. Some believe this sound is warmer and has more depth than digital recordings. But making music fit on an analog disc is sometimes challenging. To reproduce bass, the cutter has to make big, wide grooves that take up a lot of space. And although the grooves can touch, they can't cut across one another. At the end of the recording, the cutter lifts and the master disc is ready for inspection. If it's acceptable, the engineer places a sliding platform on it and scribes a unique serial number into the lacquer. Soon, this master disc will be used to make more records. The master disc has just been cut, but the lacquer surface is far too delicate to play. It's been produced solely to act as a mold. It will literally be pressed into service to make tougher versions of the recorded grooves. And this will enable the manufacturers to make many copies from just one. In the next step, they wash the lacquer disc with soap and water. They spray it with tin chloride and liquid silver. The tin chloride is a sensitizer that helps the silver stick to the lacquer. They wash away little bits of silver that don't stick. In seconds, one side of the lacquer has become a stunning silver disc with the grooves intact. But next, they'll add a duller metal to the silvered side in order to really stiffen the disc. They fasten it to a spindle on the underside of a tank lid. The disc spins, and they rinse it one more time. The water in the tank below is green because these nickel nuggets are dissolving into it. They lower the lid and the spinning disc is immersed in the solution. An electric charge fuses the nickel to the silver. And the nickel settles neatly into the grooves. Now they remove it from the tank and pry the metal layer away from the original lacquer disc. This metal layer is a stamper that will be used to press vinyl records, and the lacquer disc, which has served as its mold, is discarded. Now they look for the exact center of the stamper. A worker places it under the microscope, which is part of an optical centering punch. As the stamper disc spins, he aligns the grooves with a guide in the viewfinder. When he finds the center, he punches a hole there. Next, they clamp the stamper disc into a trimming machine. The disc turns and a cutting wheel trims the edge, cutting the stamper disc to a diameter of 12.5 inches. Now the stampers are ready to make their mark. But first, the labels must be prepared. A punch bores into the center of a stack of them, making holes. Then they place the labels on a mini press. It rises to another cutter which rounds them out. They pour black polyvinyl chloride pellets into a hopper. The pellets fall into an extruder, which turns them into hot rubbery patties called biscuits. Hoists above and below push labels to each side of the biscuit. Suction cups hold them there while a carriage moves the biscuit forward, then drops the biscuit and labels in the press. Two stampers mounted in the press apply 100 tons of pressure. The stampers are a searing 380 degrees Fahrenheit. They melt and mold the biscuit into a record. A quick cooling cycle hardens it and bonds the labels to the vinyl. A carriage then transports it to a trimming table. The table spins the record against a knife as it cuts away the ragged edges. Then the table takes the trimmed record to the finished stack, and the process begins again. This is really a well-choreographed musical production. As one record is lifted out of the press, the next one goes in. The pressing and trimming of a vinyl record takes just 28 seconds. But it's sure to get hours of play by enthusiasts who refuse to buy into the digital revolution and still believe that vinyl is a cut above. They're called mini GPs. Pint-sized motorcycles whose design is identical to that of the full-size motorbikes that race on the Grand Prix circuit. Mini GPs are designed for kids 9 to 12 years old who aspire to one day race the big bikes. A Mini GP can reach speeds of 80 miles per hour. Its chassis is made of steel tubing to which they mount the handlebars along with the clutch and brake levers. At both the front and back of the chassis, they attach a fork. Then, between each fork and the chassis, they mount a shock absorber. With a steel pin, they mount a wheel on each fork. The black circle at the center is a brake disc. Next, they install a brake caliper on each wheel. When the rider applies the brakes, the caliper grabs the brake disc, immobilizing the wheel. Now, mechanics begin assembling the engine block. Using a special tool, they install bearings that enable the gear shafts to turn. The engine has 6 gears, each of which is comprised of several steel gears. These go into the gearbox. Next comes the gear shifter. It connects the gears to the gear pedal that the rider operates with his foot. Next, they install the crankshaft. The combustion cycle rotates the crankshaft, which turns the gears. They close up that side of the engine and assemble and install the Desmodronic spring. When the rider selects a gear, this spring keeps it locked in position until the rider switches gears. The engine turns a drive shaft that, via this pinion gear, moves a chain that turns the rear wheel. On the other side of the engine, they assemble the primary couple and the various components that go into the clutch, such as clutch plates and the springs that stop and start clutch movement. When combustion drives the piston up and down, it rotates the crankshaft. The primary couple transmits power to the gearbox and clutch. This is a one-cylinder engine. They install the piston that drives the crankshaft, then mount the cylinder over the piston. They close up the cylinder with a cylinder head, then mount the spark plug that ignites the fuel mixture, driving the piston up and down. A head cover closes everything up. Next, they install the ignition. It consists of 2 magnets called a rotor and a stator. When the rotor turns, it generates an electrical charge that sets off the spark plug. Time to install the finished engine. They mount it to the chassis with support pins front and back. Next, they install the water pump that prevents the engine from overheating, along with the belt that drives the pump. Then they mount the carburetor. It mixes the fuel entering the engine with just the right amount of air. Next, they install the air filter. It keeps out debris that would clog the engine. Now the exhaust pipe, the fuel tank, the seat, and the fairing, a plastic enclosure that shields the driver. The final component is the chain connecting the drive shaft to the rear wheel. The engine turns the shaft, which turns this chain, which rotates the rear wheel. Mini GPs come in different sizes. This particular model has a 50cc 14 horsepower engine. Pretty impressive for a kid's motorcycle. No bathroom's complete without one. And any parent will tell you that no teenager can survive without one. Mirror, mirror on the wall, how do they make you after all? Well, how it's made is about to show you. But first, let's reflect on the history of mirrors. The earliest mirrors were curved pieces of highly polished metal such as brass or bronze. They're even mentioned in the Bible. Then, in the 14th century, the Venetians invented very crude glass mirrors that reflected off a metallic backing. They later perfected this technique using an amalgam of tin and mercury. Eventually, the secret of mirror making spread to other cities. By 1835, a German chemist developed the silverback mirror that we know today. A mirror starts out as clear glass. A robot lays each panel horizontally on a conveyor belt, which transports it to the washing station. There, sprayers blast the glass with water and cerium oxide, a powder derived from a type of soil. Rotating brushes scrub and polish both the top and bottom surfaces, removing oils and other contaminants. This washing process takes about a minute per panel. Next, sprayers rinse the glass with piping hot demineralized water. Demineralized because the minerals in plain tap water would damage the metals they apply next. The first metal is liquefied tin, which goes on what will be the back of the mirror. It allows the second metal, silver, to adhere, because silver won't stick directly to glass. The silver is also in liquid form, mixed with a chemical activator. Within seconds of interacting with the tin, it hardens. And as it does, you begin to see a reflection. It's this silver backing that transforms clear glass into a mirror. Sprayers rinse off the excess silver, which gets recycled back into the system. The factory will seal this silver backing with 2 coats of paint. Paint by itself, however, isn't enough to protect the silver in the long term. So they first spray on a layer of copper. Sprayers rinse off the excess copper. Then the panel passes through a dryer at almost 160 degrees Fahrenheit. This evaporates the moisture on the surface in just 75 seconds. Now the panel passes copper side up through what's called the curtain coater, a machine that runs a continuous curtain of paint across the conveyor belt. With its fresh coat of paint, the mirror then passes through an oven heated to 210 degrees Fahrenheit. After a minute and 45 seconds, the paint is cured. Now the second coat of paint. There's no reason for the different color other than to differentiate the coats. This time, the curing period is twice as long and at a higher temperature, close to 245 degrees Fahrenheit. After an acid wash to remove any metal residues, they stand the panel upright to inspect it. If they find a fault, such as a bubble in the glass, they cut that portion out. The factory now cuts these large panels into whatever size and shape the customer has ordered, using a special mirror cutting machine that's precision guided by computer software. It scores the mirror using a carbide wheel. Carbide is a strong metal. To make round mirrors, the machine first scores the panel into squares. Then in each square, it scores a circle. Using special tools, workers separate the squares, then the circles. To make beveled mirrors, they use what's called the shape bevel machine. First, it carves out the edge, then polishes it to a shine using concentrated cerium oxide, a stronger version of what they used earlier to clean the glass surface before plating it with metals. Mirror factories also ship whole panels to shops that do the cutting themselves. A fragile feat that's certainly not for the superstitious.